Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. Our new release this week is The Cowboy's Secret Romance. It's the 7th book in Jessie Gussman's original Sweetwater Ranch Western Cowboy romance series, and I'll have more about the story and a preview for you in just a bit. But first, I wanted to share some thoughts about some Bible readings that I've had lately. Now, I've mentioned here before that one of my New Year's resolutions was to read the Bible cover to cover, something I've never done before. And I'm currently in 2 Kings. Now, 1st and 2nd Kings are primarily historical records of the kings during a time of a divided Israel. But there are other significant biblical events that happen in those books, such as the lives of Elijah and Elisha, the prophets. It's the latter that I want to talk about. I'm not sure that Elisha gets all the credit he deserves. I mean, I get it. Elijah was a hard act to follow. I mean, the man was literally carried up to heaven in a chariot of fire. But Elisha performed many miracles, and they often had one thing in common. For instance, at one point, he meets with the sons of the prophets. They were an adult group learning from him, not his actual children. And they come to him with a request. The compound where they live and learn has grown too small for their growing numbers. So they ask Elisha permission to build a new facility on the banks of the River Jordan and to come with them to bless the project. So they're on the banks of the River Jordan, and they're cutting down trees for the new buildings, when one of the men's iron axe head flies off and flies into the River Jordan. Now, the guy's really upset for a couple of reasons. First, iron is not common in that part of the world at that time, so it was not an inexpensive thing to lose. Also, it was borrowed, so he felt an acute loss for that reason. What Elisha did was to cut a stick off of a tree and throw it into the River Jordan, and God made the iron axe head rise up and float. And Elisha tells the man, "You go out and collect it." There's another story of a widow of one of these sons of the prophets, who comes to Elisha and tells him that she is destitute. She has no way of paying off her late husband's debts, and her creditors are coming to take her 2 sons into slavery until the debt is paid, something that was allowed in Mosaic law at the time. She tells him that the only thing of value that she has is a small jar of anointing oil. Elisha tells the woman, "You go out, talk to your neighbors and collect all of the extra jars you can and fill your house with them." She did. Then Elisha tells her to fill all of those jars from the one small jar that she has. She does this, and her small jar of oil doesn't run dry until she has filled the very last of the empty vessels she borrowed from her neighbors. This, of course, was enough to pay off her debts and secure her future. Now, a little aside here, I was not smart enough to come up with this on my own. I actually got this from a companion devotional guide that I use. But it pointed out that Elisha often would have the recipients of the miracle be actively involved in bringing it about. God could certainly have just made the iron axe head appear in the guy's hand. He most certainly could have had the widow open her door and find all of these filled jars on her doorstep, or for that matter, a big bag of money. And there are certainly miracles in the Bible that work that way. But sometimes when we are praying for a miracle, God requires our active participation. It kind of reminds me of an old joke, which you've probably heard, and if so, I apologize, but about a man whose home is caught in a flood. The guy decides he's going to pray to God for a miracle. Now, as the water starts to rise, a neighbor in a big old four-wheel drive pickup truck comes by and asks him if he wants a ride out. The guy says, "Nope, I'm praying for a miracle." So the guy leaves. The water starts to rise, and it's up to the guy's front porch when another neighbor comes by in a boat and asks the guy if he'd like to ride out with him. And he says, "No, I'm praying for a miracle, and God is going to deliver me." The water continues to rise up to the guy's roof, and the guy's forced to scramble onto his rooftop. A helicopter comes by to rescue him, and he tells him, "No, thank you. I am waiting. God is going to deliver a miracle." Well, the water continues to rise, and the guy drowns. He gets up to heaven, and he asks God, "Why didn't you send a miracle?" And God said, "Well, I sent a pickup truck and a boat and a helicopter." My point is that I've learned when I ask for something, I need to consider that while I have no doubt God could grant my request instantly, that's not always what I should expect. And maybe I ought to look for ways that I can help bring about God's will. Anyway, just something to think about, I guess, and I hope that's helpful. Okay, back to The Cowboy's Secret Romance. It's the story of Clay Stryker, known as Preacher to most. Not because he's an actual minister, but because he's always tried to live his life as straight as an arrow. It's also about Raina Hall, who, as a young girl, was rescued from a child trafficking ring, and she's never forgotten the brave young man who refused to look the other way and risked his life to save hers. He made her a promise that night, and now she's found him to make sure he keeps it. That's all I'm going to say about the story. I don't want to give anything away, but I've got a sample that is also spoiler-free. I hope you like it, and then you'll come back this Friday for the full release here on Say with Jay. She didn't want to think about her past and the pain and the baggage that hung around her neck like a bucket of sharp stones anymore. So she wouldn't. She pushed it all aside. After her near miss yesterday, she didn't want to put so much as a toe in the water, but even that was preferable to digging up and facing the past that she'd rather keep deeply and safely buried. Clay had finished his sandwich a few minutes ago, and he sat, relaxed and calm, holding his water in one big hand and staring at the calm water, an easy expression of contentment on his face. Like they did this all the time. Like there was nothing odd about them being together. Like she truly belonged here, with the river flowing softly beside, and the wide open sky overhead, and the leaves on the trees and bushes rustling softly in the never-ending, wholesome breeze. Like they could just be a couple out on a romantic picnic, and he was satisfied with their silence, because just being with her was enough. If only. She couldn't live her life wishing for if only. That thought made her stand up more abruptly than she meant to. Clay's head jerked to hers, his eyes moving over her as though scanning for a cause before his brows raised in question. "I'm ready," she said. Then she realized her shoes were still on. She knelt to remove them. "I'd leave them on if I were you," he said as he put his garbage in the cooler and stood, his movements strangely graceful, hinting at controlled power. Why couldn't she look away? Her eyes traveled up his long legs, past the narrow waist, and lingered on the broad shoulders. His life might say preacher, but his body didn't put her in that mind frame. She'd teased him about being a farm boy. If that's what he was, there definitely should be more of them in the world. She jerked, realizing she was staring, and that he was watching her. She expected, deserved, a teasing comment, but his face was straight serious. Something burned in his eye, something she'd caught a glimpse of earlier, which had struck a match to her own deepening desire for the honorable cowboy in front of her. But she snuffed it out this time, just as she had the last, because whatever that look was in his eye, it wasn't what her body read it to be. Because Clay was as smooth and calm as the deep river flowing silently beside them. She forced her tongue to quit playing with her lip piercing and tossed her head. "You're not going to let me drown, right?" "I went through an awful lot of trouble to save you yesterday, only to let you drown today." His words were easy and smooth. "That wasn't exactly a promise to not murder me." "I suppose if you can keep from calling me farm boy, I might not be tempted to dunk you." She gave him a smug look. "Can't change what you are, even if you give me a gag order." His teeth flashed, a grin with promise that made her arms tingle clear down to her fingertips. He held his hand out, calloused and brown. "Ready?" Her throat felt tight, not only because of the curl in her stomach, but because her fear of the water was real. She slid her hand into his, slowly. The friction of their skin together tightened the coil in her stomach, mixing the fear with something else entirely. It felt electric, magnetic, and she automatically shied away. She couldn't feel that now. Not with Clay. He'd been a good friend, a better friend than she'd ever had. She couldn't ruin that. He waited while she struggled. Maybe he thought her struggle was with the water. Not quite. The physical connection of their joined hands seemed to double the pull of her heart and soul. The electric attraction only made it worse. Where was her mask of indifference that settled so easily in place when she walked the streets of her old neighborhood? Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.